When I was 19 years old, I got a side job delivering pizzas for extra money to help pay for my tuition. For 3 nights a week, I delivered during the night from 7 p.m. all the way to midnight or later. I live in a more rural area, so every delivery would be a long drive out into the large properties with gates and older style houses. Some were pretty creepy, but I could usually get a decent tip. It was a regular Friday, and I prepared my final delivery for the night. The address took me miles out until I finally reached a dirt road to turn onto. While I was used to these kinds of deliveries, it was pretty late and something just didn't sit right. Reluctantly, I kept driving down the pitch black road until I finally was met with an old but seemingly renovated 2-story house. I parked my car about 50 feet away from the porch and walked up to the front door. When I rang the doorbell, I heard nothing but silence. Finally, after about 5 minutes of waiting and another ring at the doorbell, an older looking guy who didn't look happy opened the door asking why I'm knocking on his door at midnight. And when he realized who I was, he said he didn't order any pizza. I began to apologize for the confusion, however my sentence was cut short when I heard a car door slam shut from the dark path behind me. Confused, I asked the man if he had anyone living with him on the property who owned a car. My heart sank when he told me he lived alone and grumpily went back inside his house. I turned to the dark road and could see my car in the distance. The sound had to have come from my car, and while I had the keys, I must have left the car unlocked. I couldn't make out anyone around the area of my car. However, that fact wasn't exactly comforting when I realized it meant someone had to be waiting for me in the back seats of my sedan. This was horrifying and felt like a scene out of a murder horror movie. I was never going to get back inside my car, but I had to see for myself if my ears had been deceiving me. I slowly approached my car and walked around to the backside passenger window, and sure enough laid a dark figure kneeling down in my back seat. My chest tightened and my heart began beating faster, knowing what I had just avoided. I walked back to the porch of the man's house and had my eyes trained on the car as I began to dial 911. My worst fears became true when I could see through the windshield that a head emerged from the back seats, probably to see what was taking me so long to arrive back to my car. The dark outline of a head and I locked eye contact even through the darkness. For what felt like minutes, we stared at each other awkwardly while I reported what was happening to the police, and it must have been obvious that I was reporting them to the police. Because just when the operator alerted me that the cops were only 10 minutes away, the figure emerged from out of my car and stood a confident pose and began walking towards me. I yelled out as loud as I possibly could that I called the cops on them. With the figure giving no response to that news, I began pounding on the owner of the house behind me for help. Unfortunately, the figure just continued to walk towards me slowly, and I began to realize the person was a man. 6 feet tall maybe, tan skin, and looked rugged. But mainly I could see how cold and angry this person's face was, as if I had done something to them personally. They got within about 20 feet of me at this point, and as I readied myself for the fight of my life, the door behind me swung open, and the old man from earlier walked forward with a shotgun trained on the attacker. The figure froze. The owner of the house began to order him off the property or he would shoot, and when the attacker still did nothing, he fired warning shots towards the ground. And the creepy man finally sprinted off surprisingly fast back into the darkness. I waited for the police to arrive, gave my statement, and thanked the owner of the house for saving my life. I quit delivering in the late hours of the night, especially after realizing how close I came to being kidnapped, robbed, and beaten, maybe even murdered had I not heard that creep get into my car. In my early 20s, I would make pizza deliveries to several apartments and condos on the weekends, since I wasn't exactly the party type in college. The areas I would deliver to were a little shady, but the parties always brought in customers, so I didn't mind as long as I was tipped fair. One night an order came in from an apartment on the 3rd floor of a complex known for college parties. However, when I read the order of just one large cheese pizza, my hope for a good tip diminished. When I arrived at the complex, I made the climb of 3 flights of stairs and knocked on the room number from the delivery instructions. Almost immediately, the door opened and before me stood 2 guys with masks on. Behind them laid out a dirty apartment with no lights on. Boldly, I told them that it would be $11.75. Instead of a response, the pizza box was grabbed out of my hand and the second guy pulled out a small handgun and aimed it at my face. Every part of me wanted to run out of there, but instead I froze and my legs cemented into the ground.
Are you gonna shoot me? Money. All of it, whatever you got.
The same man who grabbed the pizza also took the few $100 out of my wallet. They told me if I reported this then they'd find me. Then they both shoved me back and slammed the door. Feeling lucky to be alive, I made my way back to my delivery car and reported the men anyway, who were clearly hiding out in an abandoned, unused part of the building. When the police searched the place, the men were already gone. Although I didn't take their "we'll find you" threat serious, I started getting phone calls for the next 2 weeks leaving voicemail stating that I'm a dead man, along with my address and name.
Hi, this is George. Please leave a message at the tone. Thanks for calling. Number of messages received.
Eventually the call stopped. The police managed to track down the caller, more importantly the man who took my money and began threatening my life. To this day, however, they never caught the other one who had the gun to my face. I looked over my shoulder for the next few years, but after moving out of the area, the story is more of a reminder that the simplest of jobs can have the biggest of risk. In the late 90s, I was working the night shift delivering pizza for a small local pizza shop that stays open later than most of the other franchises. My job was pretty easy. Driving to nice suburban neighborhoods that aren't too far away makes it a profitable and easy way to make money. However, on this particular night, I saw something that changes the way I do my job. At the end of my shift, I arrived to the last house of the night. An older but modest 2-story house with lights on outside. I always prefer when customers would keep their outside garage or porch lights on, as it made my job easier and safer. I got out of my car with the large one topping and began walking up to the door. On the way up to the porch, I stopped to listen. Such a strange direction to hear a noise like that. Directly from above me, I could hear some sort of sharp scraping and shuffling. I just figured a rodent or a bird. I reached the door and knocked twice before a woman in her mid-30s answered the door and politely paid before heading back inside. I left, relieved to clock out for the night. I was about 2 seconds from entering my car when I heard the noise from earlier. The same shuffling and cutting from above. More curious this time, my eyes followed the sound. What I saw gives me chills to this day. As I stared up towards the front of the house, my gaze met a dark, human-shaped figure crouching on the roof of the woman's house I had just delivered to. It was late. Too late at night for it to be any contractors or repair services. The woman I spoke to was clearly in danger of someone trying to enter her home via the attic. The noise stops as the figure turns to face me in such an ominous manner, slowly moving back before disappearing to the back side of the roof. Instinctively, I walked back to the front door of the house and began knocking to warn the woman inside. Instead of hearing footsteps coming from inside to open the door, I began hearing someone walking on the grass from the side of the house. Admittedly, not wanting to face whoever was around the corner, I sprinted back to my car, started the engine, and dialed 911. After being told to wait in my car for police to arrive by the operator, I sat and stared at the porch to see either the figure from the roof or the customer to open their front door, considering I just banged on it. With neither showing, the police finally arrived after a long 20 minutes. They were too late. As I began giving my statement, I watched as the EMTs rolled the woman out of her house on a stretcher, nearly beaten to death with bruises and injuries all around. Whoever I saw on the roof must have eventually gotten inside, but unfortunately was able to escape before police arrived, leaving behind a 24-foot extension ladder and some tools he used to pry into the attic of the home. I went home that night feeling guilty of my response to the incident, wondering if I could have done more to prevent that psycho from getting inside that woman's house, while also remembering how close I came into contact to them at the porch. How easily it could have been me. Instead, I ran. I still can't get the image of what I saw out of my head. A slow-moving figure on the roof of an unsuspecting victim.